Hey guys, and welcome to the Indie Game Culture channel once again for a new segment that we are calling Tier List Tuesdays, where we are going to do a indie game tier list every Tuesday where we rank things from best to worst or whatever it happens to be based on the tier list we're doing. Today, we're going to be doing Indie Game Culture's list of the 50 best indie games of all time. If you've been on the website, you've probably seen the article with the top 50 games of all time that we have listed. There are some honorable mentions on that list that aren't here. There are some games that you're probably going to be thinking, oh my goodness, how did you leave those out? It's one of those things. There are thousands of indie games that we'd love to talk about, but these are basically our cream of the crop, and from those, what I'm going to be doing today is going from greatest of all time all the way down to pretty good. Every single one of these games are at least good, but there are some of them that are going to be better than others, and I'm going to go through these individually, chat a little bit about them, tell you about my personal experience and my opinion with them, and I'm going to rank them based on, again, my opinion. But if you get through to the end of this and you want to rinse me in the comments, feel free to do so. Feel free to tell me what your kind of layout would have been. You can also go over to the Tiermaker website. I'll leave the link for this public tier list, and you can send your versions of this tier list to me as well. But let's crack on. Let's get into this. So we are starting off with Lucas Pope's Papers, Please. For those that are unaware, that is basically a game where you sit in a border patrol booth, and what you do is you either approve or deny people based on the information you have in front of you. It's like bureaucratic paperwork, but it's done in such a fun and engaging way where it's partly a survival game because you have to make enough money to feed your children and keep your family safe, and if you make mistakes they dock you pay, you could potentially lose your job and everything goes wrong for your family. So it's a bit of a survival game, and it's also a puzzle game in the sense that you have to figure out what the actual logic behind all these different people you have to approve or deny is. It's really good. Would I say that it's Game of the Year material? Because I'm not going to put it in indie royalty. I'm not going to put it greatest of all time. I feel like we have to kind of leave these blank for the things that are going to really stand out. But I think Papers, Please probably deserves to be in great game. It's better than good. It's one of those that's completely unique. It's completely stand out in terms of its format. We've seen it repeated with things like Little Guardsmen and stuff like that, but it's definitely out there on its own. So I'm going to make that great game, and we've started the tier list officially. So there we go. We move on to Untitled Goose Game. I love Untitled Goose Game. I thought it was really funny. It's so chaotic. You just get to live out the worst version of yourself as a goose, hunking as you go. It's also a game that started off as, I believe, an office prank where they would have like this little goose pop up on their desktop and basically not allow people to click on their screen, and then they decided to go, oh well, okay, we can make a whole game out of this, and that's exactly what they did. I really love it. I don't think it's Game of the Year material. It's not even great game material for me, because it's great in the sense that it's comedic and it's fun and the mechanics are simple. It's really accessible. It's one of those games that you could probably sit anyone down to play and they would enjoy it. But yeah, I would say it goes in pretty good for me, and I don't think I would put it any higher. Alright, Pathologic 2. This is a game that I often go to bat for. It was a game that was made all the way back in 2005 by Ice Pick Lodge, and then it was remastered, I think it was in 2019. Tiny Build took it on and they republished it, and they kind of just refined it and made it a much more accessible version of what was already there, and they added a lot of DLC and extra stuff to it as well. It's a really strong game for me, but it's one of those that it's really hard to sell it to other people just because it's a super gritty, super brutal survival game that just isn't going to be for everybody. It's one of those games where it's almost brutally hard on purpose to the point where it's almost not fun to play. And it's for that reason it's really hard to recommend to people. If you like survival games, if you like games that are more geared towards narrative storytelling and art and the gameplay is almost a vehicle for driving the story rather than actually letting you have fun, then you will like this. It is a fantastic game, but yeah, it's very, very hard to place it into those three categories because so many people will disagree with me, but I think I'm going to put it in great game. Based in 2019, I can't necessarily remember what the game of the year was for 2019, but I can remember some of the games that came out that year. I don't think this one, it's maybe game of the year contender, but it's certainly not game of the year material in the sense that it would have won. So I'm going to keep it here, but it's a great game and you should check it out if you haven't before. We move on to Undertale. Now this one is pretty clear cut for me. I'm not a huge Undertale fan. I have played it through. I've got the platinum for this game, so I've seen everything that needs to be seen to give it a good review via the tier list. I think this one for me is game of the year material, and I could potentially see it slipping into indie royalty, but the reason why I place it here and not in indie royalty is because, one, it's not a super special game for me. I've never got into the deep lore of Undertale. I kind of just seen it as one of those like one and done, really satirical and funny RPG Maker games. I'm not super into RPG Maker games. Some of them I take to, some of them I don't. Like for example, Undertale's great, but I'm not a big fan of One Shot. I'm not a big fan of Lisa the Painful. Stuff like that. Amori as well, not really my bag. This one kind of bucks the trend because it is so universally accepted that I have to stand up and take notice of it. And in terms of like the combat, the way that you can be passive and go for the genocide route, there's so much to the game, and you could finish it in 5 hours, or you could keep looping and looping and it would keep changing. So there's a lot of value to it. Also, the soundtrack's fantastic. Toby Fox is very talented. But yeah, that's where I would place it. I could see a lot of people putting it in there. I don't think it belongs in the greatest of all time, just because it's one of those breakout stories where someone had such a tiny budget and they made a fantastic game. Great, and I will give them all of their flowers for that, but it is still a very limited game in terms of scope because of that. So that's where it goes for me. We move on to Rollerdrome. Rollerdrome is, for those that haven't seen it, because it's almost like a little bit of a hidden gem. It came out in, I believe it was 2023, could be 2022, can't quite remember, but it's a game that's kind of Tony Hawk's meets Hunger Games meets like a battle royale, and what you do is you roller skate around different areas. You have to kill all the enemies with your pistols or whatever gun you have in your hand. You also have to do tricks to you can't reload your ammo unless you do tricks, because that automatically reloads your bullets. So essentially you have to play the game like a Tony Hawk's game so that you can play it like a over-the-shoulder shooter. It's very clever, it's very creative. It also featured in our Game Jams list of games because it started off as a Game Jam game, so you might want to have a look at that video. But yeah, in terms of where I would put it, I think it's a very special game, but there are so many solid games in here that I just think that it scrapes into pretty good. I could maybe see it jumping up into great game, but that's where I'm gonna put it. Cool. We move on to Among Us. I'm gonna ruffle some feathers. I know there's loads of people that still love Among Us, that still play it as like a great social deduction game, which is what it is, don't get me wrong. But I think it was one of those time capsules where everyone was playing it during COVID. We were stuck in the house. It was a great way of playing and communicating with each other. And then whenever that finished, the game still has its fans, don't get me wrong. I still see loads of Among Us merch in toy shops and stuff like that. So kids still love it, I'm sure. But it's a good game. I'm not going to give it any more plaudits than that. Honestly, I don't feel it would get anywhere close to great game, but it is good. It deserves its praise. It had its moment in the sun. That's all I really have to say about that one. Okay, Hotline Miami. This one is pretty cool in the sense that you can play it as a handheld game because you can get it on the Vita as well as a couple of other consoles, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, but it's just a great handheld game that you can take on the go. As well as that, it's a great top-down shooter. It's one of those that has inspired others like Oxtoe and I'm forgetting the other one, but yeah, there's a lot of top-down shooters that have took this format, and the soundtrack's fantastic. It's fast-paced. It almost plays like a first-person shooter meets puzzle game, because you have to map out where you're going in the level and you have to work it out that way. So I'm very tempted to put it in here, but I think it belongs in pretty good. In all honesty, I think that's where it goes. You can fight me in the comments if you don't agree, but I think that's where it goes. But it's definitely on the top end of pretty good. What I'm going to start doing now is actually ranking these within their particular ranks, and I would say that's accurate. That's the ranks within their different tiers, and we'll keep moving. Okay, we move on to Balatro. Quite a new one for those that are unaware. It is a roguelike poker hand deck builder game that I have already poured upwards of 100 hours, maybe closer to 150 hours at this point into. I'm working on getting all my gold Joker stickers and getting a gold stake on every single deck. It's taking a long time because it's very RNG based, and you'll notice that Slay the Spire isn't on this list. Whenever I was redoing the article, I believe it was a couple months ago, I was kind of faced with either putting Slay the Spire in there or putting this one in, and honestly I think Balatro, just based on how clever it is, how fun it is, how addictive it is. I know Slay the Spire has its fans, and absolutely it should. I think, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, Balatro is a little bit better, and that's why it's on this list. That's why I can select it. But where does it go on the tiers? Honestly, I think it's Game of the Year material for this year. In terms of Indie Game of the Year, I think it's definitely going to be talked about whenever November, December time rolls around. I don't know if it will win, but it's definitely going to be a contender, and a strong contender at that. It's not just there to make up the numbers. It's an incredibly strong game. I think it deserves to go there. And it may be a bias because I've spent so many hours playing it and I love it, but I definitely think it belongs there. Not as good as Undertale, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely going in that tier. Alright, now we have the controversial place of putting Edith Finch where it belongs. You guys really didn't receive my video for Edith Finch very well. Some of you guys were just like, yeah, that's your opinion. I don't agree, but you know what? You're entitled to your opinion. I really appreciate you guys, because there's a lot of people that were just like, no, your opinion's trash, and I get that. That's fine. But that was how I felt about the game, that it's probably got a better reputation than it deserves. It's still a great narrative story game. It's still definitely, at the very least, a pretty good indie game that deserves to be in the top 50 indie games of all time. Probably just scraping in there in my opinion, but it's definitely up there. And for that reason, I think it's definitely pretty good, and I think it's better than Among Us. It's better than Untitled Goose Game. It's not as good as Roller Drum, so that's where I would put it there. And if you want to know my full opinions on Edith Finch as of 2024, go and watch that video, and then you can rage at me in the comments, either here or on that video, or both. I don't really mind. Okay, we move on to Venba, a game that came out last year. It's only an hour long. It's a narrative-driven story game, and it's weirdly and profoundly brilliant, even if you're not someone that can relate to the story directly. If you listen to the Indie Game Culture podcast, we being Malika, JT, and myself, were talking about Venba, and it really had a tangible effect on Malika, who comes from a more, not an Indian background, but a similar background in a lot of ways, just because they had the same kind of disconnect between their culture and their newfound culture, because they moved to the UK, and that's the kind of effect and the story that Venba tries to tell. In terms of the gameplay, it's very straightforward. It's kind of like a more dialed down cooking mama sort of game, and it's being a little bit kind, because the gameplay is not as frantic and chaotic and, dare I say, fun as Cooking Mama, but it is still very engaging. The art style's cool, the story's very well told, and like I said, you can get it done in over an hour, just over an hour even, so it's one of those short and sweet experiences that you could definitely love. Now, it was considered for Indie Game of the Year last year, so it technically is Game of the Year material based on what everyone thought last year. I would honestly be inclined to agree. I don't think it's good as Balatro, I don't think it's good as Undertale, but I do think that it's Game of the Year material, so I'm going to stick it in here. Okay, Dave the Diver. This is one that, honestly, I think is good. And I know a lot of people are going to go, oh, well, it's not an indie game, it's not an indie game. I get that. I get the ties to Nexon. I get that there's a lot of money behind it. It is still a small team that developed it in the form of Mint Rocket. But, like, it's one of those things. You'll either agree with it or you don't. I've got it in there as an indie game based on the overall vibe and the approach of the game, as well as the small team. So I think it's justified enough. As for the game itself, I like Dave the Diver. I think it's a great game, so at the very least I'm going to put it in here, but I don't think it really belongs in Game of the Year material, because I don't think it's honestly that good. I think it was blown out of proportion just because, pardon me, that it was so well received because of the variety of the games presented. Like, the game is constantly throwing new stuff at you, and it remains fresh for like the 20 hours that you're going to play it. But I don't think it deserves to be Game of the Year material, because I've played it through. I didn't finish it, mind you, but I played a good 15 hours of it, and it was just one of those really passive experiences where I was like, yeah, I'm doing the thing and I'm getting to where I'm needing to get to, and oh, there's a fun little animation or a funny joke, but yeah, it washed over me a little bit. So I think it definitely belongs there, and I'm not going to say that it's better than Papers, Please or Pathologic, because I don't believe that. So I think in here is where I would put it. Okay, on to Dead Cells. I have not played an awful lot of Dead Cells. It's one of the games that I've listed on the top 50 based on kind of critical acclaim, based on the fact that if I didn't put it in the list of the best games of all time, I would look like a bit of a fraud. So I've only played a little bit of Dead Cells. It's not really my thing. I sort of enjoy it, but I don't think I'll ever go back to it and love it in a big way. But I think it still belongs in Great Game, and I would say it belongs... Now, I'm basing this just on public opinion rather than anything else. I would say it probably belongs at the top of Great Game. I don't know if it would be in Game... You know what? It would honestly be in Game of the Year material. Would it go ahead of Balatro for me? I suppose this is my list, but I'm trying to keep it as fair and as professional as possible, so probably there. I think that's probably where I would put it, and that is not based on my own personal opinion. If I was basing it on how much I like the game, based on the limited experience I've had with it, I'd probably put it there, but that's not a fair appraisal of the game, to be honest with you, so I will put it here so that no one comes after me. Okay, we now move on to Dredge. Dredge is a really cool horror game, honestly. It's one that really falls off towards the end, because all of the cheap tricks and the horror stuff at the top of the game are incredible, and they put you on edge, and there's a real risk and reward to going out at night, and your boat's really slow and it chugs along, so you never know if you're actually going to make it back to port or not. And it's really good in the terms of like resource management, the survival aspect of it. It's really, really good. And the world itself, the open world, pardon me, is brilliant. Like, I really love Dredge, but it does fall off towards the end where you have to start grinding for resources, and there's not a real easy way to do that other than kind of gamifying systems in a way that you shouldn't really have to. And by the end of the game, when you're going to the third or the fourth island that you haven't went to yet, there's no real risk and reward to going out at night. You could stay out for days on end. You can always get to a port because you've got a full upgraded map. Like, you just feel grossly overpowered for what is essentially a horror game. So it kind of loses out at the, I'd say 2/3 in, that's where it falls off. But overall, it's a really good experience. I would say it's definitely either going to be the best of pretty good so far, or it's going to be in here. I think it just slips into great game, but it's definitely not as good as the rest of them. So that's where I'm going to put that one. We now move on to Cave Story. Cave Story is, for me, one that you have to really praise for the fact that it is, well, I'm going to cut to the chase here. It's indie royalty. That's exactly what it is. It's maybe not one of the greatest of all time because it was made in 2004. It has been updated as Cave Story Plus, but it is a very dated game. But it is essentially the best 2D platformer indie game of the 2010s by probably a mile. And it was made so long before indie games were really considered a thing. Technically, indie games are considered a thing as of like the 1970s, or maybe it was the 1980s, but not really, like not properly. So it's one of those where you kind of have to respect it based on, one, nostalgia, based on, two, the fact that it was the first of its kind and breaking the mold for everything else that you see below it on this tier list. It's one that you have to play to respect everything that's came after. And whenever you play Cave Story, you'll think, well, this could easily have came out in the 2010s and it would still have done fantastically. And it just shows you how ahead of the game the developer was. And it's a solo developed game. Like, I believe they had a little bit of help here and there, but this was made by one person and it's a phenomenal game. So based on the story, based on the tiny budget, based on everything to do with Cave Story's story, I'd call it indie royalty. And you can fight me again in the comments if you don't kind of agree with that, but I do. Okay, Rocket League. It's one that I've poured way too many hours into, and I actually had to ban myself from playing it in 2021 because it took up like 800 hours of my year that year. And as someone that has to play so many games for my job, it wasn't conducive to a very good performance, because like that's 800 hours I could have spent playing like 80 different indie games, and instead I decided to play Rocket League. And to be honest, I was only ranked, it was above Diamond. I think Platinum is above Diamond. I was like the lower end of Platinum, which is good, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't pulling up trees. Like, I wasn't a champion at this game, so the time I was putting into it was not justified. But yeah, in terms of the game, just taking myself out of it, it's a very, very good game. It's an incredible concept. It's hard to consider an indie game now because obviously Epic own Rocket League, so it's no longer really an indie game. Kind of in the same boat as Minecraft, and we'll get to that. But for me, it's still a very, very strong game. It's still something that I would consider Game of the Year material, because there was nothing like it, and it just blew up out of nowhere. So I would probably put it in here, ahead of Balatro, behind Dead Cells in terms of quality. I think that's exactly where it belongs. Okay, next up we've got Jusant. I am going to praise Jusant because it is a very good climbing game. I'm going to praise Jusant because it looks really nice. It's a fun platformer. It takes a really unique big swing to try something different, and for the most part it succeeds. It's a little bit janky at times. I wasn't really all that invested in the subtle story it was trying to tell, so it flattered to deceive for me a little bit, but it's still a quite good game. But it's not going to crack into great game. It's going to sit in this pretty good pile. And in that, I would say it didn't affect me as much as Edith Finch. It's probably better than Goose Game. I would say it's going to slip in there. Then we move on to Citizen Sleeper. which is a very underrated game. It's a game that came out in, I believe it was 2022. Could be wrong on that as well, but I think it was 2022. It's a really, really strong CRPG game in this, and it has this unique UI where you have to use dice rolls that you get given on the day, and you can use those to either action different things in the world, or you can go and it's very hard to explain Citizen Sleeper in all honesty, because it's very complex in its systems, very complex in the way that you interact with characters, the kind of scrolling map along the eye that you have. It's just, there's a lot of systems you have to get used to. I actually included it in our games that are slow burns that you have to give a chance to. Citizen Sleeper is very much that. You have to give it the chance to get good. But believe me when I say it does. It's one that I would say it's like Game of the Year material. I think it's definitely indie Game of the Year material for sure. I think it's better than Vamba. I'd say it's probably better than Balatro. It's hard to say it's better than Rocket League just based on the pure popularity of Rocket League. So I'd say it slips in there. And I think that's a very fair place to put it. If it was me, obviously Dead Cells would be down. But yeah, that's probably where I would put it. And I think that's also fair just in terms of like public conception as well. And then we move on to Fez. I think that, again, I'm going to base this on nostalgia, based on pedigree, based on kind of the roots of indie games and where they've come from. And for me, Fez is also indie royalty, and I think it's actually a little bit better than Cave Story in all honesty. The story of Fez, and if you want to see the story of Fez, go and watch Indie Game the Movie, where it gives you a rundown of Braid, of Fez, and Super Meat Boy as they're being developed in 2010. Well, not in 2010, but the movie came out in 2010. And you just slowly see Phil Fish losing his mind as he tries to develop this game. And he did have help in the beginning, but he ended up having to solo develop the project in the end and to get it over the finish line. And what he came up with, like, it is absolutely sublime. Like, if you think of like Super Paper Mario that kind of takes the 2D and allows you to switch into 3D, Fez was doing this, but it was more a case of having a 2D screen but a 3D plane that you could flip around on its axis. And I believe you could do it like in forward. It was almost like everything was square and you could flip it around in 4 different sections and you could reveal different areas and paths on the map to platform. It's very hard to explain with words. It's a much more visual thing that you need to see happening. So maybe go watch a trailer for it if you've never heard of Fez. But the game design, especially when you think that this was back in like maybe 2009, I can't quite remember, but it was way ahead of its time. It had no right to be as good as it was. It's got the kind of reputation as one of those first ever indie games that pushed the genre forward. I would say indie royalty is nailed on for Fez, so that's where I'm going to put it. Okay, we are into Neon White. Neon White is genuinely one of the best design games I've ever played. I'm a sucker for speedrunning. Like, I love GDQ, I love watching that. I love the way that it's written in that kind of that kitschy anime sort of feel. I'm a really big fan of Ben Esposito because he obviously done Donut County as well. And while it doesn't feature on this list because it doesn't belong on this list, but it's still a very nice game. Neon White is just something special in the way that it reinvents platforming. It allows you to speedrunning and get good at these games. It's almost like Sonic with guns in the way that you time trial through stages and you have to use the different mechanics to get there from A to B as fast as you possibly can. It's absolutely phenomenal. The story's great, the world building's great. I think it belongs, at the very least, in Game of the Year material, and I would say it would be top of Game of the Year material for me. I think it's better than Undertale, better than Dead Cells, better than all of those. I don't think it quite cracks into indie royalty because it was robbed at the Game of the Year Awards, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't have the same kind of fanfare and cultural acclaim that a lot of other games do. It doesn't really have the same kind of story that Cave Story and Fez has to prop it up in that way, so it's the very top of Game of the Year material in my eyes. Okay, we're getting into some big hitters now, so we are going to go with Hades. I think you have to put it in indie royalty as a starting point, simply because, one, it's a super giant game. That almost always means that it's going to be a great game by default, because they don't really miss when they do stuff. Secondly, it's a fantastic roguelite. It basically sparked interest in a genre that just, it wasn't a thing. Like, no one really cared about roguelikes until this game came along, and then suddenly you could not move for roguelikes. This was the one that brought that to prominence, so it's kind of created a subgenre in and of itself. I know roguelikes existed before this, but it's kind of galvanized that genre and brought it back into the cultural zeitgeist. As well as that, the storytelling, even though it's a roguelike, is fantastic. Like, whenever you die, the story pushes on and pushes on every single time. So each time you loop, something feels different, and it's not just you getting an additional number or having a new relic to play around with. It's also you get a new conversation with a new character. You suddenly have new bosses. Like, you don't have to fight Megara, you have to fight like one of the other ones instead. There's a lot of different things that happen from run to run. It's also really well written. It's so funny. The overall art style is fantastic. It's so addictive and replayable. So indie royalty for sure. And I'm debating making this the first greatest of all time indie. I don't know if I personally feel that way, because I like Hades, I really do, and I can see the value and the cultural appeal, because everyone seems to love it. But it's definitely top of indie royalty from me, because these are kind of, it's based more on their story and the nostalgia and the fact that they were the first of their kind. That's why they get in there. But in terms of quality, Hades is farther superior, just because it's a much more modern, a much more fleshed out game. Honestly, I think I have to put it in greatest of all time just because of the design. Like, it doesn't really miss in any category. Like, there are some aspects to it. Like, if you're immediately good at Hades, you can almost get through the game without seeing a lot of the quality of the story and the writing, because you'll just sail through and miss everything. But if you're even like above average, you'll still die a few times and you'll see a lot of what Hades has to offer. So it is a little bit flawed, but it's still like a 9 out of 10, possibly a 10 out of 10 for other people. So greatest of all time, Hades is the first one in there. Into the next one, which is Celeste. I again am going to put this here as a default. It is indie royalty. People love this game for its story, they love it for its art style. The speedrunning community have taken to this game in a really big way. Like, every single GDC you will have a Celeste speedrun, and if you've ever seen one, they are ridiculous. You need to go and watch one. I think they're only about 20 to 30 minutes long at this stage. They might have optimized it even more, I don't know, but you need to go and watch one because they are absolutely sick. And if you've played this game, you know that it's a really hard platformer. I was relatively good at speedrunning this. I got through Celeste in, I think it was like 1 minute 45 I got through, and I thought that was really good. But these guys take it to another level. So it's, for me, the best 2D platformer probably ever. Like, at least in the indie sphere. I don't think there's any 2D platformers that aren't in the indie sphere that I would say rival it. I mean, maybe Klonoa 2, Lunity's Veil from back in the day. If you know, you know. But for me, it's definitely in greatest of all time. Like, I'm not even gonna try and justify my opinion anymore, because I don't really need to. It's a phenomenal platformer. If you haven't played it, go play it and you will agree with me, I promise you. Some people think the story's a bit meh, and you know what, fine. It is a bit kitschy, but even still, it's a lovely message. It's a brilliant art style, brilliant soundtrack, and the best, most refined platforming mechanics you will find. So that's where I'm putting it. It's top of the pile as of now. I think for me, it's better than Hades. For some other people, I could see Hades being better than it, but this is my list, so Celeste is going above Hades for me, but they both belong in there. Next up, we have Gone Home. This is a tricky one for me, just because Gone Home is a very old game. It's a little bit dated. It's got a lovely story. I think, for me, it's definitely going to sit at least here, because it's very similar to Edith Finch in the way that it's presented, because it's a walking sim, but it's a little bit better than Edith Finch in terms of world building. It's something that I mentioned in the video. I think it's got a stronger, more cohesive story across the board, and it's also one that allows you to peel back the layers rather than pushing you through the story and just kind of, like I said in the video, hitting you over the head with the story. So Gone Home's better in that regard. I don't think it really goes any higher than that, to be honest with you, though, because it is a 2009 game that is a little bit dated. It could definitely do with a little bit more polish. It is very one note in a lot of ways, so it's hard to justify putting it any higher than that, especially with the quality of everything around it. So I'm going to keep it there. Next up, we have Limbo. Limbo, at the very least, is Game of the Year material, because back in the day, I'm pretty sure it won Indie Game of the Year. It might not even have been a thing back in that time. I'm not sure if Indie Game of the Year even existed back then, but it's definitely going to be in this category. So I guess we just kind of work our way up and see where it stops. So is it better than Vamba? Absolutely. Is it better than Balatro? Absolutely. I'd say it's stronger than Citizen Sleeper 2. Pardon me. Is it better than Rocket League? Yeah, I would say, in terms of like overall cultural appeal and the fact that it has that, again, first indie sort of feel to it. It almost creeps up into there automatically. But I think there are better examples of what Limbo does now. I think that's the problem. I've included it on this list of 50 because if I'm going to include one, it's going to be Limbo, just based on the fact that it was the first one. But like, there's Bramble the Mountain King, there's Inside, there's Little Nightmares, there's so many other options that are probably better than it now. But because it's the first of its kind, it's the one that people still recognize as the blueprint. So for me, I would say that it sits in there. I think it's better than Undertale, Dead Cells, Rocket League. I think all of those pale in comparison. I think Neon White's a better game in terms of design, everything really, to be honest. So that's where I would see it sitting. But Limbo was a great game, don't get me wrong. If you've never played it, it's definitely still worth going back to and trying, so definitely do that if you haven't. And then we have one that's very much in the same boat. We have Braid. So Braid is a brilliant time manipulation game. It's, again, one of those that was the first of its kind. Indie royalty. I think it's pretty much nailed on. In terms of indie royalty, Braid is a fantastic game, but it does get pulled down by the fact that it isn't as fun to play now. It definitely feels dated. Like, you would look at it and go, this could honestly be a Flash game. You know, it has that kind of vibe to it at times. So yeah, I think it still earns the indie royalty spot just based on the fact that it is so clever with its time it's clever with its time manipulation. It's clever with its level design. It's also got a weird undertone in terms of its story, linking itself back to, I can't remember what it is, but it is some really weird kind of conspiracy theory stuff, so look into that. But yeah, I think it definitely just slips in there based on name alone, really. But it is a quality game, don't get me wrong. Alright, we are into Disco Elysium. I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to do that. If you disagree, I don't really care. Disco Elysium is... I don't think there's going to be another game that knocks it off that perch for me. It's the best game that I've ever played, at least best indie game that I've ever played. There's some other ones that I really hold dear to my heart, like, I don't know, Kingdom Hearts springs to mind along with a few others, but Disco Elysium is the most ambitious, brilliant, fleshed out game that I've ever played, and you'd think that ambition would make it fold in on itself and you would never get that project done, especially with the relatively small team that they had. But they managed it. Like, they managed to make this culturally, politically, comedically dark, twisted, brilliant story. And I don't get how they done it, and also made the gameplay interesting and deep and allowed you to role play in so many different ways. Like, I have played Disco Elysium through maybe 5-6 times. No playthrough has ever felt the same. I think you have to go in with the mindset of, okay, this time I'm going to play as this kind of person, and then suddenly the story changes ever slightly based on the choices you make, and you have to try and stick a little bit more rigidly to that if you want to get the replay value out of it. So for example, the first time I ever played was an intellectual build, but then the next time I played, I just played like as a lughead physical character where I punched my way through situations, and honestly the second one was so much more fun. But yeah, absolutely phenomenal game. I can't do it justice in words. If you've never played it, go play it. Alright, so Faster Than Light. This is one that I played quite a lot years and years ago when it first came out. I don't think I've ever went back to it. I like the game, but the thing that put me off about it, and this is going to be a personal gripe of mine, and it is going to pull it down on the list, so just you're going to have to deal with it. I don't like the real-time aspect of Faster Than Light. Whenever people break into your ship and you have to close off like doorways and kind of, it almost acts a little bit like a tower defense because it's all happening in real time. I don't like that. I like the time to think. I like the time to kind of plan what's happening. It's the thing that pulls it down, but I love the way that you can work through this kind of ever-changing, procedurally generated roguelike story, and it's always different, it's always changing, you always have to react to the situations that you're being dealt with. And if it wasn't for the real-time aspect of it, I would probably put it into great game, but I think it's there. I think it's probably better than Rollerdrome and everything below there. Not as good as Hotline Miami. I think it slips in there, and I think that's a fair assessment. Let me know if you think so too. Okay, next up we have Journey. Journey is going into the greatest of all time for me, and it's just going to slip in just behind Disco Elysium, just ahead of Celeste. Journey is one that, like, I can show you my little... Where is he? Oh, wrong side. I can't get a good angle. Let me see. There we go. Can you see him? He's upside down, but I've got a little Journey man on my arm. I absolutely love Journey. Journey is short and sweet, like a lot of the games that we've mentioned here. It's a allegory for life, death, and the afterlife, told in such a subtle, clever way. It introduced passive multiplayer, which just wasn't really a thing until Journey done it, and it allowed you to kind of share your experience with someone without ever knowing who they are or having any way of really connecting or communicating with them. There's just so many artistically brilliant decisions that went into making Journey, and it's simple when it needs to be, it's complex when it needs to be, it's so beautifully told in terms of its subtle story. It's got art that doesn't even feel dated in 2024. It still looks fantastic, and the soundtrack is award-winning from Austin Wintory. It's great. So again, you can come at me in the comments if you don't agree, because in terms of gameplay, it is quite limited. But that's it's by design that's the case. It doesn't want to overcomplicate things so that it feels like more of a magnanimous thing as you slip through the game. But I can see why some people would go, it's not my thing because there's not enough happening. For me, games as art is very much a big thing for me, as much as games for fun are as well. So I can respect it from both sides, and it's one of the top tiers for me. Just not as good as Disco Elysium, because what is, to be honest, but Journey's fantastic. And we move. Alright, we move into Norco. Norco is a text-based adventure that's really weird, kind of got a sci-fi feel to it, got a religious vibe to it as well. Quite hard to explain Norco, but it's sort of similar to Disco Elysium in terms of its UI and in terms of its kind of dark, twisted humor, but it does slip into the more sci-fi and religious aspects for sure. It's one that if you don't like text-based games, you're not going to like it, because that's literally all it is. There are a couple of little mini games that you play around with, but for the most part, it is kind of a point-and-click text-based game. So that's what you get from it. I would say that it slips right into the bottom of Game of the Year material for me. I was so surprised that no one took it up as like an Indie Game of the Year nominee, because for me, it was like a groundbreakingly brilliant game that showed me and showed the world, I suppose, that text-based games are still very much a thing, and they still have the legs to be something. So that's where I would put it. I'd actually put it just slightly ahead of Venba, actually, in terms of quality, maybe just lacking behind the rest of these, but it definitely belongs in Game of the Year material. So that's where I'm going to put it. Next up, we have Outer Wilds, another absolutely huge big hitter, and Outer Wilds is like sublime. You cannot beat the Outer Wilds in terms of the feeling of freedom, the feeling of exploration across this little pocket solar system they've created, the physics that go into designing the Outer Wilds. Like, it's outrageous how they've pulled it off. But it's one of those, like, I've listed it in the slow burns video. It's one that you have to give time to explore the world, let it unfold slowly. You get a little clue, you die, you go, okay, let's act on that clue and find another thing. It takes a long time for the Outer Wilds puzzle to click and for you to finally finish the game, but it's not really about racing to the finish. It's about finding all the things along the way, and that adds to the magnificence that is the Outer Wilds. I don't want to give any details, to be honest with you. If you've ever seen, there's a really great video from The Escapist on the Outer Wilds Club, which explains the Outer Wilds kind of phenomenon of how this group of people that have played the Outer Wilds help people through the game without ever revealing anything. They're so good like that. So you should definitely join the subreddit if you want to go through the Outer Wilds and really give yourself the best chance of enjoying it. But yeah, I would put it in greatest of all time, absolutely. I think that it slips just behind Journey for me in terms of overall appeal. I think Journey's just, it's one of those games that maybe I am biased towards and like more than most people would or should, but it's definitely better than Hades and Celeste for me, just because it is so unique in the way that it tries to do something. Like Celeste, we've seen 2D platformers before, we've seen roguelike hack and slashers before. You've never played a exploration game in a pocket solar system that has been made from the ground up. It just, you've never played it, and you'll never play it again unless they do Outer Wilds 2, and I just don't think that's going to happen. So that is where it goes. Bomb Rush Cyberpunk is next, and honestly, I think it's one of those that's okay. It's probably because I was trying to make up the numbers on this list. I liked it probably more than most other people would, because it's like, it harks back to the old Dreamcast era of Jet Set Radio and Sunset Overdrive, which is a little bit more modern. But yeah, it's good game. It's not going to get any further than that for me. It's better than Among Us, better than Untitled Goose Game for me. Do you know what? It's not even better than Untitled Goose Game for me. I think it slips in there. It's better than Among Us, but I wouldn't really give it any more claim than that. We're trying to push through these because I know this is running long. We're approaching an hour. We'll try and get this done within the hour. How many have we got left? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. We still have 20 to go. So this might be an hour and a half long, but hey, whatever. So we move on to Pizza Tower. I have never played Pizza Tower. Like, not at all. I've never played Pizza Tower, so I'm going to purely base this on public opinion and move on. It's Game of the Year material because it was Game of the Year material. I'd say it's better than Vemba, probably better than Norco, probably better than Balatro. I don't really have the knowledge to say it's better than any of the rest of these, so that's where I'm going to put it, but I don't really have any skin in the game, so it is what it is. Next up we have Pacific Drive. It's one that is actually from this year. It's one of the very few that are actually from this year. I thought it was really, really cool. A very unique survival game where it uses the vehicle as your shield from the elements, and when the vehicle's dead and gone, that means your run's basically dead and gone, and you have to keep your car healthy in any way you can by like taking scrap and avoiding monsters and anomalies in this world, and as well as that, to give it its credit, it is that new weird feel. It really nails that in terms of offering this like sci-fi story that you have to uncover through little data entries and using your notepad, not notepad, but you get what I mean, to go through all the data entries and kind of piece together what everything is. So I thought it was great, and that's where I'm going to put it. I'm going to put it in great. I think that it's not as good as any of these, but it's definitely better than everything that's down below. Next, we have Superhot. Superhot's a game that I played last year for the first time. I had played a DLC from Mind Control Delete before I actually played the original Superhot. That was back in 2017, 2018, when my wife was actually working on that game. So that's how I got to know that one. I played Superhot. I've played it in full, got the platinum for it, and it's a very annoying platinum to 100%. So I worked pretty hard to get that. And what I learned from doing that is that there is a real choreography to this shooting game that makes it feel more like a puzzle game, because time only moves when you move. So you've got bullets moving, not in real time, and you have to dodge them. You can plan out your next move. It's very much like Neo in the Matrix meets a traditional FPS game, and it's super. I think that it definitely slips into great game, probably into Game of the Year material, in all honesty, and I would probably... Ooh. Is it better than Balatro? Ooh. For me, it's not, so I'm going to put it here. It's definitely Game of the Year material. It's something that I would definitely say is an indie Game of the Year nominee, but I don't think it deserves to go any higher than that. Okay, next one is In Stars and Time. I love this game. Like, you've seen from my video essay that I absolutely adore In Stars and Time. I'm frustrated beyond all hell that this game isn't as well known by other people. I wish I could just slip it into indie royalty and call it a day, but it's just not something that you can do. It's not indie royalty because no one's giving it the chance to be, but it's definitely Game of the Year material for me. If you want to know why, just go and watch my In Stars and Time video essay and save us both a bit of time, because we need to get through these. But In Stars and Time is a fantastic JRPG, so yeah, it deserves to be on this list. It deserves to be, I would place it, and this is going to be fueled by my bias, but I'm going to stick it in here. I think it's better than everything backwards of that. It is very much my opinion. A lot of people are going to disagree with that. It is what it is. Next up we have Inscription. So that is a card-based roguelike, and it's also a top-down RPG in the second half, and it's also an escape room simulator in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things going on with Inscription. It's also like a Cold War era narrative kind of slipped in there. There's a lot of things going on in Inscription. I don't want to spoil any of it for you, but it's kooky, it's weird, it's got a little bit of a horror vibe to it without being super scary or unsettling. There's a lot of cool things going on there, but the coolest thing is the card-based gameplay, which feels very similar to Slay the Spire, but different in a lot of ways as well. I don't think I can really add more to the description there, so I'm going to place it where I place it. And for me, I don't think it's greatest of all time. I think that's too generous. I don't think it's indie royalty because I don't think it has that general appeal to everyone. Like, everyone knows what it is. So I would say there. I don't think it's as good as Neon White for me, but it's definitely pretty close. So that would be where I place it. Alright, next one is Hollow Knight, a game that I actually played very recently. I had bounced off Hollow Knight maybe 2-3 times already, and pardon me, I found it really hard to get into Hollow Knight, but as soon as I really opened up to it and gave it a chance, as soon as I was through the opening stages of the game, and it just took over my life, and I played it right up to Godhome. I'd done a few of the Pantheons, and yeah, I called it a day after that, because honestly, I'm never going to be good enough at that game to get through all of it, so I checked out there. I seen everything I had to see. I loved every second of it. I would happily play it again, and that's something that I wouldn't say I have a lot of games, because I'm not a big replayer of games, but I could see myself doing Hollow Knight again at some point. It's going to slip in here somewhere, and I think it's just going to slip behind Outer Wilds for me. I think these three are pretty untouchable in terms of their overall appeal. Because I'm not a huge Metroidvania fan, I would struggle to say like a Metroidvania was like in my top 3. It would be very hard for me to say that, but it's definitely as close as it can get without getting on there. So that's where I'm putting that one. And we're into the last line. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We're in the last 14. Okay. I'm going to do some quick ones to speed up. Super Meat Boy. I don't super care about Super Meat Boy, to be honest with you. It's a really good platformer. It's a great game. It's honestly probably indie royalty based on how much people know Super Meat Boy, and it's of that same era. But I don't think that it pushes the boat out enough, because it is a good platformer, but Celeste is a better platformer for sure. And there have been better platformers since Super Meat Boy. It's a great arcade-based game. It's definitely Game of the Year material based on the time that it came out. I would place it somewhere around here. Again, fight me if you don't agree. And let's move on. What's another one that I can place really quickly? Stanley Parable. I don't like the Stanley Parable. I know everyone else does. I know that it was like culturally relevant. It's not a particularly good game. It's just very meta, and it's like well written and funny, but it's not a very good game. It's practically like it was a mod that was turned into a game, and for me, it goes there. That's gonna ruffle some feathers, I know. Oh my goodness, I've hit the microphone. My bad. People aren't gonna like that, and that's okay. I'm willing to take the heat on that. That's where I would place it. Another one I could do quite quickly, Minecraft. I'm putting it into indie royalty, okay? I'm not a big fan of Minecraft. I played it back in the era whenever it was just a like extension, like a browser extension. It wasn't an actual game, like per se. Yeah, that's where I put it just by default. That's not really based on my opinion. It's not based on a love for it. It's just based on the fact that if I don't put it there or there, and I don't believe that it's gonna go there in my eyes, but that's where I'm going to place it just to make sure I don't take lots of heat. But in all honesty, it probably shouldn't really even be on this list. It's just the fact that it was an indie game that it slips in here. But yeah, that's where I'm going to put it. Another one that I can do quickly. Come on, quick. And that'll bring us down to 10. The Forest. I think The Forest is a great game. It's a really good survival game. It's scary. It's a little bit janky, but the jank's actually quite nice about it. Yeah, I like it. I don't really have that much to say on it outside of the fact that it's a really good survival game. It's not as good, or sorry, it is better than Pacific Drive, it's better than Dredge, it's better than Day of the Diver. I don't think it's better than Pathologic, so that's where I'm going to put it. Alright, next we are into the last 10. Let's do Tinykin, because that'll be quite easy. Tinykin's a great platformer. It's very similar to Pikmin in terms of how you use your little minions to platform around the world. It's very clever. It's probably better than it has any right to be. I didn't care too much about the story, but the art style's phenomenal. Love that. Sorry, my throat's going. I apologize so much. But I don't think it's a great game. I think it's a good game. I think it's probably... I would say it's the best of all these games listed here. But I don't think it's a great game. So I would put it top of the pile here. Next one. Terraria. I'm also going to put this here. I have no skin in the game. I've maybe played a couple hours of Terraria an awful long time ago. I never took to it. Not a big fan of it. Don't think I ever will be a fan of it, but I know that everyone loves it to bits. I know that it's indie royalty. It has every right to be, because I can see the level of detail, the fact that the developer is still developing content for it now. It absolutely deserves to be indie royalty. I don't think it's greatest of all time because, one, I don't feel that way, and two, I think it just falls shy of that in all honesty. But I would definitely put it in indie royalty. I need to reorganize these actually. No, I don't, because I don't feel strongly about these two, so we'll keep it the way it is. Okay, let's do Laika Aged Through Blood. Really cool Metroidvania, marries together traditional Metroidvania design with kind of motorbike traversal, kind of like Trials Fusion if you've ever played that. Really cool. It's also got gunplay and bullet time, like what is it, bullet time? Yeah, it's called bullet time, like Max Payne. It marries all those things together quite nicely. It's also got a really cool soundtrack. It's also got a really like dark and gritty storyline, and it's very good that way as well. I would say, honestly, it just slips into great game and no more. Just because it hits so many different checks in terms of soundtrack, gameplay. Like, it's got a little bit of everything, and it's also got a unique selling point as well. Probably better than Pacific Drive in all honesty. Wouldn't be better than the rest. But yeah, that's where I would put it. Okay, we're getting through these quickly. We are past the hour now, but come on, we'll push through. Let's do Sifu next. Sifu is the kind of not roguelike beat 'em up. Is it a roguelike beat 'em up? We'll just say beat 'em up. It's very Dark Soulsy in its combat, where you have to treat every individual fight and give it the respect it deserves, rather than just kind of beating enemies in a Streets of Rage sort of fashion and moving on to the next. Sifu really makes you master the combat, get good at parrying, blocking, combos, everything, and it's a little bit easier than it should be now, because I remember when it first came out and it was really difficult, and then they added a patch and suddenly it's not as difficult anymore, which sucks because it's not as good of an experience, to be honest with you. But it's still a great game, which means it's going to go into great. Game of the Year material, honestly, probably. I think it just slips in there. It's better than Vamba. I don't think it's better than Norco. And that's where it stops. But I think it does slip into Game of the Year material just. So that's where I would put it. Okay, 6 more to go. Come on, let's go. Next up we have Lies of P. Lies of P is a very good Souls-like. Again, it's one of those that you would struggle to call an indie. Again, with ties to Nexon, the same thing as Day of the Diver. But again, it was made by a small team. It was considering what it was trying to do, which is effectively copy the From Software formula and put out a game which is equally as good. It actually does a really good job, to be honest with you. The stories, it's a little bit hit and miss in some areas, but the fact that they're able to take the license of, well, not even the license because it's royalty free, or no, sorry, public domain. Pinocchio is now public domain. They've taken that, they've made it into a gritty story that's completely set it aside from its like Disney roots. So that's pretty cool in and of itself. It's a dark and twisted world, really cool. bosses, some of the best Souls bosses that I've encountered, like full stop. So that's pretty cool as well. From that, I think it does slip into, I think it's just great game, honestly. I'd say it's just behind Papers. No, it's too harsh. I don't think it's... I'm really struggling with this one, actually. It's going to go there at the very least. Does it get into Game of the Year material? Ooh, I am struggling with this. I mean, let's do it one by one. It's better than Vemba, yes. Is it better than Sifu? No, I don't actually think it is. Okay, that's where it goes. That's where I'm leaving it. Cool. 5 more. Let's go. Return of the Obra Dinn. Of the 2 Lucas Pope games, this one is the better of the 2 for me. It's a brilliant detective game. It's designed in such a way that you can't just fire answers at it until you get the correct one and just do it through guesswork. You have to embrace the social deduction and the, well, not even social deduction, because you're not talking to anyone or dealing with anyone. You go through a series of tableaus of things that have happened in the past, and through these little snippets into the past, you have to deduce who people are, what's happened on the ship, how they've died. Very, very difficult if you don't engage with everything that's going on around you. And it's a brilliant detective game. So I'm going to put it Game of the Year material for sure. It's better than Vemba. It's better than Lies of P. It's better than Sifu. It's better than Norco. Better than Super Hot. Better than Balatro. Yep. No. That's where I'm going to put it. I don't think it's better than Stars in Time. That's where it stops on that rung. But I think it's better than everything behind it. It's such a strong game. So brilliant. People will get put off by the, I believe it's 1-bit, the art style. It is quite unpalatable at times, but it's a choice and it helps the game stand out, so I am all for it. Okay, last 4. Let's keep it going, people. Binding of Isaac. It's a game that I quite like. I've played quite a bit of. It's one of those games that you can kind of mindlessly play over and over and over again. I never got into it to the point that I understood what all the cards and relics were just based on what they look like. I didn't get into it to that point. I kind of just liked playing it blindly, kind of the way that Ed McMillan wanted everyone to play it. That's the way that I enjoyed it. But I eventually kind of ran out of steam with it. I beat the original game's like first run. I haven't played Repentance. I haven't really engaged with the Rebirth stuff. I've never really went back to it, to be honest. So I like it. It's a great game. It definitely belongs in Game of the Year material, right? It's better than Vemba. Is it better than Lies of P? Yeah. Better than Sifu, better than Norco, better than that. Is it better than Balatro? Not for me. Yep, that's where I'm putting it. I think that one's going to be received quite poorly. It is what it is. And we're into the final 3. Cocoon will do first. It's not indie royalty, it's definitely Game of the Year material. And I would say it probably slips in here for me. In terms of puzzle games, Cocoon is probably one of the best modern puzzle games that we've had in years. Probably since, like, I know it's not on this list, but The Witness, maybe. I'd say they're kind of in the same ballpark in terms of complexity, level design, like a unique puzzle method. Like, we've seen it in Portal, and we've never seen anything that's matched Portal in terms of, like, out of the box puzzle thinking that just breaks the internet, so to speak. Cocoon's probably the closest thing that's came to that in the indie sphere. And it's kind of like Portal in a lot of ways, in the sense that you go into a portal to a new world to effect change within it to pop out into another one. Kind of like Inception in the form of a puzzle game. Very, very cool. Very well received on my part. It's a great puzzle game. It's a little bit lackluster in some areas. Like, for example, there is no story to that game. I think they wanted there to be a story just because artistically it's phenomenal, but I can't follow anything that's going on. So if it had a little bit more narrative to it, I'd probably put it a little bit higher, but for me, that's where it belongs. Secondly, or second to last rather, we have Sea of Stars. I am going to stick it up here. And some people will disagree because it is so recent, because it is a game that doesn't really like roll off the tongue. If I say to someone what's Sea of Stars, people won't actually know, whereas if I say what's Hollow Knight, they'll know instantly. It's one of those things. But I think it's a game that I gave it my first ever 10 out of 10 as a professional reviewer, and I wholeheartedly stand by that. It's not just a love letter to Chrono Trigger, which it is, don't get me wrong. It's not just that though. It's a stunningly well-made indie game from the ground up. It's one of the most fleshed out and fantastic JRPGs within the indie gaming scene. In Stars and Time is the only other one on this list that even comes close, and it doesn't come close in all honesty. The art style is both nostalgic and retro, but with modern lighting and other different aspects to it that just set it apart in a phenomenal way. The story is kitschy, and like through the power of friendship you fight God and all that. Like, it doesn't really push the boat out too much, but the way it's done, the characters, it's definitely fit for purpose. And the combat and the pacing, so brilliantly done. You never feel like you're going to get overwhelmed by a boss, but you never feel like it's not going to be a challenge either. It's that perfect pacing that takes you from start to end. I have nothing but praise for Sea of Stars. I think it falls short of everything on this top tier, but it definitely belongs to be sitting among them, so definitely there. And then lastly, we have Stardew Valley, which I am going to place in the top tier, and I'm going to place it, I'm actually really struggling between Hollow Knight and Stardew Valley here, because Hollow Knight had such a profound effect on me, even though it was just a number of weeks ago, and Stardew Valley's been a favourite forever. I think I'm going to put Stardew Valley just ahead of it, just based on the longevity, based on the fact that the game never ends, based on the fact that Eric Barone just keeps adding stuff to this game to make it better and better. Yeah, it's the ultimate farming sim. If you haven't ever played it, I don't know what you've been doing, because it's on every single console, including your mobile. You can play it on the go, you can do whatever you want. If you've played a farming sim before but you haven't played Stardew Valley, I don't know what you're doing with your life. You need to go and play it, and it's definitely in the greatest of all time. So there we have it, guys. That is my indie games of all time tier list. All 50 of them ranked based on greatest of all time through to just the ones that are pretty good. What do you make of this overall list? I think it's pretty fair. Just looking back through it, I don't see anything that I would change or move around. I think I'm pretty much happy with that, and I'm going to lock it in. If you like this video, if you like the tier list format, then be sure to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Let me know what you think of the overall tier list. Let me know what you think of this format. Like, if you want me to do other stuff, let me know what tier lists you want to see next, and we'll start doing them every Tuesday. This is a little bit more like a podcast format, because it's just going to run super long. The ones that we do moving forward, they're not going to be as long as this, because this was 50 different things I had to sort through, so it was a lot. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this. If you want to go and do this tier list and show it off to me, then by all means do that. I'd love to see it. You can get that. I'll put the link to the tier list in the description, and if you want to see the full article as well, you can go onto the Indie Game Culture website and have a look at that. But yeah, we will wrap it up now. I've been Cal, and I'll see you next time.